It's funny how heartbreak can wear a suit. Because the first time I met Adrian Price, he was standing at the head of a long mahogany table, looking like every lawyer in those cold Manhattan firms, ruthless, confident, untouchable. And I hated him instantly. Maybe hate isn't the right word. Maybe it was fear of how easily a man like him could undo everything I'd built with a single flick of his pen. He wasn't supposed to be here, and neither was I. Adrian Price was the eldest son of the Price family, the very empire my late father once tried to destroy before his death left me tangled in debts and unfinished contracts. And now, the Price family wanted to save me by making me their partner in a charity project. Pretty lie wrapped in legality. In truth, it was control, a leash they could tug whenever they wanted. And Adrian, of course, was the hand holding that leash. He didn't smile when we met. He didn't even look at me for longer than 3 seconds. He just extended his hand and said, "Mr. Rivera, let's keep this professional. I wanted to laugh, because when he said that, I caught something flickering behind his polished eyes, something I couldn't name then. Something fragile, maybe even human. The first week was pure hell. Adrian and I had to work together every day, co-leading a youth rehabilitation program, a project meant to polish the Price name while paying off my father's debt. He spoke in crisp sentences. Me? I swore under my breath every time he corrected my reports. "You're not writing an essay, Mr. Rivera," he'd say, tapping the page with his Mont Blanc pen. "This isn't about feelings. It's about facts." And every damn time, I wanted to throw his pen out the window. But somewhere between the endless meetings and the cold cups of coffee, I began to notice things: how he always stayed late to redo the paperwork I messed up, how his tie was always slightly crooked by midnight, and how he looked at the kids in the rehab center with quiet, unguarded sadness. One night, I stayed behind to finish a report, and when the last staff left, the office felt eerily quiet. Adrian was still there, typing, the blue glow of his monitor outlining his sharp jaw. "Don't you ever go home?" I asked, trying to sound casual. He didn't look up. Home doesn't feel like home. It was such a small sentence, but it hit too close to something inside me. That night changed something between us. He began to talk more. Not much, but enough. I learned that Adrian's parents didn't just pressure him, they owned him. Every choice, every breath. He'd gone to law school not because he wanted to, but because he was told to. And I hated that I understood. Because I was living a different kind of prison, one built on guilt, obligation, and the ghost of my father's mistakes. So maybe that's why, when he smiled for the first time, a real, soft smile, I felt something crack open in my chest. "You're not as bad as I thought," he said one evening as we left the office, rain drizzling over the city. I raised a brow. "That's your idea of a compliment?" He shrugged, umbrella tilted between us. "Don't get used to it." But I did. I got used to his quiet glances, the way his fingers brushed mine when we handed each other papers, the warmth of his shoulder when we walked too close. It wasn't love yet, not then. It was tension, longing, and the dangerous realization that maybe, just maybe, Adrian Price wasn't as untouchable as he wanted the world to believe. The first time he truly let his walls down, it was midnight again. We'd just come back from a community event, exhausted, soaked from the rain. The power went out in the building, plunging us into dim emergency lights. Adrian sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I guess that's our cue to call it a night." I leaned against the desk, crossing my arms. "You really hate being alone, don't you?" He froze just a flicker, but enough. "Don't project," he said softly. "I'm not," I whispered. "I can just tell." Something in his eyes changed, and before I could think, he stepped closer. "Do you always talk like that to the man who controls your contract?" His voice was teasing, but his gaze wasn't. It was searching, hungry. "Only when he's pretending to be heartless," I said. Silence stretched. And then, slowly, painfully, he reached out, fingertips brushing my cheek like he was testing if I was real. "You don't know what you're doing," he murmured. "Neither do you," I breathed back. And then he kissed me. It wasn't gentle. It was desperate, like he'd been holding his breath for years and finally found air. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like someone's pawn or someone's mistake. I just felt wanted. When he pulled back, we were both shaking. "This can't happen," he whispered, but his hand stayed on my face. The next morning, he was colder than ever. Professional. Detached. Like the night before had been a dream. And yet, every glance, every brush of his hand said otherwise. We began living in this quiet war, pretending by day, breaking by night. It was both heaven and hell. Because the more I knew him, the more I saw the man beneath the lawyer, a man who'd never been allowed to want anything for himself. And the cruel part? He wanted me, but his family, they found out. Of course they did. One evening, I walked into the office to find Adrian standing by the window, jaw clenched, papers crushed in his hand. "They're pulling you from the project," he said, not looking at me. "What? Why?" He turned, eyes blazing with something like fury or fear. "Because they know. They know about us." I felt the floor drop beneath me. "Adrian," he slammed his fist on the desk. "Don't say my name like that. Not here." It wasn't his anger that broke me. It was the tremor in his voice. The way he couldn't look at me without breaking. "Tell me you'll fight them," I whispered. He laughed bitterly. "Fight my family? The prices don't lose, Elijah. They erase." I stepped forward. "Then let them erase me." "Don't," he said sharply. "Don't make me choose." But it was too late, because love had already chosen for us. If I'd known that love could feel like this, like drowning in slow motion, maybe I would have run sooner. The morning after that conversation, Adrian didn't show up to work. His assistant said he was handling family matters, which, in Price family terms, could mean anything from a forced business merger to an emotional execution. By noon, the rumors had already spread. The project was being shut down for internal restructuring. My contract would be terminated by the end of the week. I should have seen it coming. I really should have. But the truth is, when you've been starved of affection long enough, you start to mistake kindness for permanence. So I went to his apartment. I told myself it was to fight for the project, but the second I saw him standing there in his doorway, wearing a wrinkled shirt and a look that screamed exhaustion, I knew I wasn't there for business. "Adrian," I said quietly, "talk to me." He didn't move, didn't even breathe for a moment. Then, with a voice that was barely his, he said, "You shouldn't have come." "Why? Because your family said so? Because I told them I'd fix it?" He snapped, eyes flashing. "That I'd make it disappear." "Me? You mean me, right?" I took a step forward, chest tight. "You told them you'd make me disappear?" His jaw tensed, and I could see the war behind his eyes. "Elijah, please, no." I cut in, voice shaking. "Don't do that. Don't beg me to understand when you won't even fight for what we—" He suddenly reached out, grabbing my wrist. His touch burned. "I am fighting," he said, voice low and ragged. "You just don't see it. If they think we're done, they'll stop watching you. They'll stop hurting you." His words hit like a punch to the gut. "Hurting me? Adrian, they already destroyed everything I had. My father's gone. My name's dirt. And now you want me to just stay alive?" He interrupted. His voice cracked. "That's all I want, Elijah. For you to stay alive." The silence that followed felt heavier than any argument. He let go of my wrist slowly, like releasing something he knew he'd never touch again. "I'm sorry," he whispered, "but this is goodbye." And then he closed the door. For weeks I didn't see him. Not at the office. Not at the charity. Not even in the endless blur of city faces. I told myself I was done, that I'd rebuild like I always did. But every night, I found myself walking past his building, staring up at the lit windows like some pathetic ghost. Then one night I got a message. No name. Just a location. An old pier near Brooklyn, long abandoned since the city's new developments pushed it out of sight. I went, because of course I did. He was there leaning against the railing, coat fluttering in the cold wind. "I shouldn't have texted you," he said before I could speak. "You always say that," I said softly. "And yet, here we are." He gave a humorless laugh. "Old habits." The city lights shimmered on the water, casting reflections that looked like shattered glass. We stood there for a long time, the air thick with everything unsaid. Finally, I asked, "Was any of it real?" He didn't answer right away. When he finally looked at me, his eyes were wet, though he didn't let the tears fall. "Every second," he said. "Every damn second was real." Something in me broke, because I wanted to hate him. I wanted to scream, to tell him he ruined me. But all I could do was step closer, until I was standing inches away. "Then why does it feel like I'm the only one still bleeding?" He closed his eyes. "Because I learned how to hide it better." The wind picked up, cold and sharp, and I could smell the faint trace of his cologne, the one I'd grown addicted to during those long nights in the office. "I can't keep doing this," I whispered. "You pull me close, then push me away. I can't breathe like this, Adrian." "I know," he said, voice barely a breath. "But if I pull you any closer, you'll burn." "Then let me," I said, tears stinging my eyes. "Let me burn." He froze. For one heartbeat, I thought he'd actually let go, that we'd fall into that familiar, dangerous warmth again. But instead, he stepped back. And just like that, the distance between us became a wall I couldn't cross. "Goodbye, Elijah." It wasn't the first time he'd said it, but it was the first time I believed he meant it. The months that followed were brutal. I threw myself into work, smaller projects, freelance design gigs, anything to pay rent and stay busy. I told myself I'd moved on, but every quiet moment reminded me of the way his hand used to linger on my back when no one was looking. Then came the news. Adrian Price had resigned from his firm. No explanation, no press release, just gone. It made headlines for a week. Price airwalks away from Empire. And then the city moved on like it always does. But I couldn't, because when you love someone like Adrian, you don't just forget. You wait. The waiting ended 6 months later. I was sketching in a cafe when a shadow fell across my table. "Elijah!" I looked up and there he was. Gone was the pristine suit and the perfect composure. His hair was longer, his eyes tired but softer somehow. He looked human. "What are you doing here?" I asked, heart slamming against my ribs. He smiled faintly. "Trying to start over." "With me?" "With myself," he said, sitting across from me. "But maybe, if you'll let me, with you too." I stared at him, unable to decide whether to laugh or cry. "You disappeared for half a year, Adrian." "I had to," he said quietly. "I needed to break free from them, from everything. The firm, my family, the lies. And now you just show up? Like nothing happened." He didn't flinch. "No, like everything happened." I wanted to say no. I wanted to tell him it was too late. But the look in his eyes, the raw, trembling honesty undid me. "Coffee?" he asked, voice trembling with hope. It was such a simple word, but somehow it felt like a promise. So I nodded. "Coffee." We started over. Slowly, carefully. No secret meetings. No lies. Just two men learning how to exist in a world that hadn't made space for them before. He took a job at a small legal aid office in Queens, helping immigrants and low-income families. I went back to teaching art to kids from the same program we once ran together. Sometimes, after work, we'd walk along the East River, shoulders brushing as the city glowed around us. "This feels unreal," I told him one night. He smiled. "That's because we used to live in cages. Freedom feels strange when you've never tasted it." "Do you miss it?" I asked. "The power, the money, the family name?" He shook his head slowly. "No, because none of that ever belonged to me. But this does." I looked away, cheeks burning. "You're still terrible at flirting." "I'm a recovering lawyer," he said dryly. "Give me time." I laughed, really laughed, and he looked at me like it was the most beautiful sound he'd ever heard. But peace doesn't come without ghosts. One night, while I was closing up the art center, a man in a gray suit showed up. "Mr. Rivera?" he said politely, handing me a white envelope. "From the Price family." My blood ran cold. Inside was a single line written in immaculate handwriting. "He belongs to us. Don't forget where you stand." I didn't sleep that night. When I told Adrian, his face went pale. "I thought they wouldn't." Wouldn't what? I snapped. Wouldn't come after you? You think they let people go that easily? He pressed his palms to his face. I can handle them. No, Adrian, you can't, I said, voice breaking. They own you. They always will. He looked at me, then desperate, lost. I don't want to lose you again. Then fight them, I said. For real this time. He hesitated. And if I lose? Then at least you'll lose for something. The following weeks were chaos. Adrian confronted his family in court, challenging the very contracts that bound him to their empire. He faced threats, bribes, even blackmail, but he didn't back down. And I stayed. Through the sleepless nights, through the whispers and the fear, I stayed. Because this time he wasn't fighting alone. When the verdict finally came, the courtroom was silent. The judge ruled in his favor. Adrian Price was officially free. He didn't look triumphant. He looked relieved, like he'd finally exhaled after years of holding his breath. When we stepped outside, the sun was setting, golden light washing over the courthouse steps. He turned to me, eyes shining with tears. It's over, he whispered. I shook my head, smiling through my own tears. No, it's just beginning. He reached for my hand. In public. No hiding. No fear. Then let's begin, he said. And when his fingers laced with mine, the city didn't collapse. The sky didn't fall. It was just peaceful. For the first time, we weren't living in the shadows. We were just two men, flawed, bruised, but free. It's strange how peace feels louder than chaos. For months after the trial, I'd wake up in the middle of the night expecting to hear sirens, phone calls, someone knocking at the door. But there was nothing, just quiet. The kind of quiet that used to terrify me, but now felt like a gift. Adrian moved into a small apartment 2 blocks from mine. He said he didn't want to rush anything, that he wanted to learn how to live like a person, not a product. But every morning, I'd find him sitting in the cafe across the street, reading the paper, waiting for me to show up so we could walk to work together. He looked different now, softer around the edges, the permanent tension in his shoulders replaced with something lighter. There were still traces of the old Adrian. The sharp wit, the dry humor, the way he'd look at me like I was the only thing grounding him. But he'd changed in all the right ways. And maybe so had I. One evening in late spring, we went back to the rooftop where it all started, that first night when we'd argued about the project, when I'd sworn I'd never work with him again. The city stretched below us, endless and glittering. Do you ever think about that night? I asked. He smiled faintly. Every day. You called me an arrogant, emotionally constipated control freak. I grinned. I wasn't wrong. No, he said softly. But you also stayed, and that made all the difference. He stepped closer, the golden hour sunlight catching in his hair, and for a moment I saw the man he used to be and the man he'd become, two halves finally at peace. I used to think love was supposed to hurt, I admitted quietly. That if it wasn't painful, it wasn't real. His gaze softened. And now I think love's supposed to make you want to stay. He smiled, not the lawyer's smirk, not the polite public grin, but something warm and unguarded. Then stay, he whispered, and I did. The months that followed were simple but not easy. Healing never is. There were nights when Adrian still woke from nightmares, flashes of boardrooms, arguments, his father's voice echoing in his head. I'd hold him until he stopped shaking. And there were nights when I'd spiral into guilt, remembering my father's debts, wondering if I was worth any of the sacrifices Adrian had made. But somehow we always found our way back to each other. It wasn't perfect, love never is, but it was real. It was steady. It was ours. One Sunday afternoon, I found him sitting on our couch surrounded by stacks of legal documents. My heart clenched for a moment, fearing he was going back to that world again. But when I looked closer, I saw the header, the Rivera Foundation for Youth Empowerment. He looked up and smiled. Before you panic, this isn't what you think. I'm not going corporate again. I'm helping you build something new. Helping me? I blinked. He nodded. You started this, Elijah. The art center, the programs you built, hope from nothing. I just want to make sure it never gets taken away again. I didn't realize I was crying until he stood up and brushed his thumb across my cheek. "You're incredible," I whispered. "So are you," he said softly. "You saved me." I laughed through the tears. "You're the only lawyer I know who thinks being saved means getting paint on his shirt." He looked down and sure enough, there was a smudge of blue paint on his sleeve from where I'd touched him. "Worth it," he murmured. That summer, we held the opening ceremony for the foundation. The event was small, just a handful of kids, local artists, a few volunteers. Nothing fancy. But as I stood at the podium, looking out at the faces of people who believed in second chances, I realized something profound. This was what my father had wanted all along. Not power, not revenge. Legacy. Adrian stood off to the side, hands in his pockets, smiling in that quiet, proud way of his. Our eyes met, and for a moment, the noise around us faded. Everything that had broken us had somehow led us here to this tiny miracle of belonging. Later that night, we walked along the river, the city lights reflecting off the water like shattered stars. "You know," he said, "I used to think I was incapable of love." I looked at him, surprised. "You?" He nodded. "When you're raised to see affection as weakness, you learn to hide it, to bury it. I spent years convincing myself I didn't need it. Then you showed up all fire and defiance, and suddenly I couldn't remember how to breathe without it." I stopped walking, turning to face him. "You're not the only one who was scared. I was terrified too, of losing control, of being seen." He reached out, cupping my face gently. "Then I guess we both lost control." His kiss was slow this time, not desperate or stolen, but sure, certain. The kind of kiss that said, "We made it." Weeks turned into months. Seasons shifted. We built a home that didn't look like much from the outside, just 2 floors, a messy art room, too many coffee mugs, but inside, it was filled with laughter, arguments about takeout orders, and the kind of silence that didn't feel empty anymore. Sometimes, when I painted, I'd catch him watching me from the doorway. "What?" I tease. "Never seen a genius at work before?" He'd smirk. "I'm still trying to figure out how a man who leaves brushes in the sink can call himself a genius." I'd throw a towel at him, and he'd laugh, that deep, unguarded laugh that still made my heart stutter every single time. One autumn evening, we drove out of the city, no destination, just open roads and the kind of quiet that feels like peace. The sky was painted in pink and gold, leaves swirling across the windshield. Adrian rested his hand over mine on the gearshift. "Do you ever think about how different things could have been?" I glanced at him. "All the time. But if I had the chance to change it, I wouldn't." He smiled softly. "Even the pain?" "Especially the pain," I said, "because it led me to you." He looked away, blinking hard, and I squeezed his hand. Sometimes, love doesn't need grand gestures or perfect words. Sometimes it's just the way 2 people sit in the same silence, understanding, unafraid. The first snow came early that year. We were at home, curled up on the couch, the city lights flickering through the frosted window. Adrian had a book open on his lap, but I could tell he wasn't reading. "You're staring again," I murmured. "Guilty," he said, closing the book. "You still take my breath away." I laughed softly. "You say that like I'm some kind of miracle." He leaned in, his forehead resting against mine. "You are. You always were." And in that moment, wrapped in warmth, the world outside fading into soft white, I realized that the boy who'd once hated a cold-hearted lawyer had fallen in love with a man who'd learned how to feel. Years later, people would ask how we met. Sometimes we'd laugh and say, "Bad contracts and worse timing." Other times, when it was just us, Adrian would smile and say, "He saved me when I didn't even know I needed saving." But the truth? We saved each other. He taught me that love doesn't have to be loud to be powerful. And I taught him that gentleness isn't weakness, it's the bravest thing you can be. One evening, long after the city had fallen asleep, I found him on the balcony, watching the skyline. "Couldn't sleep?" I asked. He shook his head. "Just thinking." "About what?" He turned, his smile soft. "About how lucky I am." I joined him, wrapping my arms around his waist. The city stretched endlessly before us, but for once, The world felt small enough to fit inside the space between his heartbeat and mine. If we ever lose everything again, I whispered, promise me we'll still have this. He kissed the top of my head. We will, because this you, me, the quiet, this isn't something they can take. And maybe that's what love really is. Not the grand confessions or the stolen kisses under rain-soaked skies. It's the way two souls survive each other's storms and still choose to stay. It's finding peace in someone's chaos and warmth in their silence. It's knowing that even after everything, the pain, the loss, the fear, you can still wake up next to them, look into their eyes, and think, I'd do it all over again. That night, as the snow fell softly outside our window, Adrian whispered something I'd never forget. By day, I was everything they wanted me to be, he said. But by night with you, I finally became who I was meant to be. And I smiled because I understood. The day belonged to the world. But the night, the quiet, the tenderness, the truth, it was ours. Always. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.